Chapter 13. "Listen to me, sweetheart," Malou said. "We've got to go back to—" "I'm not about to listen to you, Malou. You've turned on me. You know better than that damn cat. I just want to get out of here," Dan screamed again, raising his gaze to the tips of the trees. "And that's where we will go, out of here," Malou agreed, touching Dan's hand. He snatched it back like a petulant child. "Just point me in the direction we need to go and I'll follow," Dan relented. "Okay then," Damiano said, pushing himself off the tree trunk against which he had been leaning. "Let me lead the way, it'll be quicker." As Damianos was walking ahead of the couple, Dan whispered to Malou, "How could you side with the devil? Tell me that." "I didn't side with anyone, Dan," Malou replied, her voice down to a murmur. "I just listened to what he had to say when I arrived at the zoo." "A zoo? What are you talking about?" "It was a place where he keeps all the people in animal forms that he hasn't been able to tame." "Aha, so he's shown you his true purpose, has he?" "I told you he was the tamer, the guide to hell on Earth." "Not exactly, but that's not important." "But how could you say it's not important? That's why we've been trapped in this horrific situation and you're too short-sighted to see it." "Stop it, Dan," Malou said, raising her voice a little. "Your mind is still under the influence of that drug, and you can't see things for what they are." "And you can? Then tell me why you are following a demonic cat to see wherever he wants us to go." "He's told me where we're going already, and why." "Oh yes, and where's that? To Lucifer's Inferno?" "No, honey, we're going back to our house." "Our house? What on earth for?" "Just let me explain, will you?" "Okay, go on." "He wants us to go back to the house, the way it was years ago, and once we're there, we have to find a book of ordinance." "A book of ordinance? You mean like a book of rules? You've got to be kidding me." "No, Dan, I am not joking. It's a book written in ancient Greek guiding people to redemption." Dan exploded in roaring laughter and stopped walking. "And you believed him? What choice do we have, Dan?" Malou demanded. "If we can find it, we'll be back in the car and on our way to the drugstore." Dan fixed his gaze on his wife. "And that's all we've got to do? Just tell me one thing, though. Why hasn't he retrieved it himself if he knows where it is?" "It's because he's only a human being in our imagination, and a cat in real life." Dan chuckled some more and shook his head. "I am well aware that the drug is still wreaking havoc with my brain, Malou, but not that little spiel of his is all lies. He can turn himself into anything he likes, and be as real to anyone who looks at him." "Exactly, he can be as real as you want him to be. But is he actually anything else than the cat we've seen in Pahokee?" They continued following Damios, who was now well ahead of them, while Dan remained silent for a moment before he said, "Since I know this isn't real and it's all in our imagination, I will go to their house and see if we can find the darn book. But I can already tell you, Malou, we won't find anything resembling any book when we get there." Damiano stopped and turned around to face the couple. "Ah, I hear that you've finally agreed to go to their house, have you?" "I've agreed to nothing, Damianos. I've only accepted to look for your book, but if it's not there, I can assure you I'll kill the cat that you already are." "I've already welcomed a good fight, Dan. You should know that by now. But don't forget, the reality could take on the shape of imaginings and vice versa, and before you try killing anyone, you will need to be sure of who you're slaying. Don't try lecturing me, Damianos. You won't fool me anymore. I'll know who you are, in whatever form you take, the moment I lay eyes on you." Malou listened to that exchange and wondered how much of that reality Dan could grasp in his drugged state. When they emerged from the forest into a clearing, Damianos pointed to the edge of it. "Look ahead of you," he ordered. Dan and Malou did, and soon saw their house on top of the hill, but it didn't look anything like how they remembered it. The old mansion still had the majestic appearances of its former glory, but it hadn't retained any of the shades of happiness it once had. The brick walls were brown with decrepitude, the windows seemed to be draped of sadness, and the front door wasn't at all inviting anyone indoors. "And you think your book is inside that house?" Dan asked. "I'm quite sure it is." "But you said you lived in that house with old Solange, and you couldn't move the book from the top shelf," Malou countered. "And now you're saying you're not only quite sure?" "Well, the fact is that I haven't been inside the house for some time, and I have no idea if Solange still has it. You see," Dan said, turning his face to Malou, "what did I tell you? I bet this is another trap of his." "Well, trap or not, Dan, since we've come this far, and since it's the only way for us to return to Pahokee, let's find that book, okay?" Dan nodded. "And where will you be while we're in there?" he asked Damianos. "Oh, I'll be around, don't worry about me," Damianos replied, as aloof as ever. "I'll wait for you right here," he added, sitting down, his back against a nearby tree. There was definitely something eerie and foreboding about this house. Dan and Malou had no idea what they would find inside it. Lifting his gaze to the roof of the old mansion, Dan said, "Look, there must be someone living up there. There's smoke coming out of the chimney." Although the sun rays blocked some of her view, Malou could also see the plume of smoke rise above the rooftop. Yeah, that must be Solange burning wood in the fireplace. But why would she need a fire at this time of year? Dan asked. It's not winter. He stopped talking suddenly. We're not in 2000 anymore, Malou. He sounded frightened. This is getting weird. Of course we're not in 2000 anymore, Malou replied matter-of-factly. If we were here, we would be walking up our driveway and seeing our house, not this old thing. I guess you're right. Let's get on with it then, Dan rejoined decisively. When they reached the impressive oak door and Dan was about to knock, it opened slowly, a creaking sound accompanying them as they stepped into the hallway. Damianos had been right. It didn't look anything like their house, inside or out. There was a staircase at the end of the corridor and an archway to their left, giving onto a large and comfortable-looking living room. The two winged chairs facing the fireplace in the corner of the room appeared unoccupied from where they stood, while the sofa, adorned of faked silk cushions, had obviously seen better days. But what had attracted their attention almost as soon as they stepped into the room were the bookshelves lining the far wall. They were filled with books of all sizes and shapes. I see you've come for a visit, have you? A feminine, tremolo voice said from one of the winged chairs. Well, yes, ma'am, Malou replied tentatively. We've come to spend a bit of time with you, actually. Were you expecting us? The woman who rose to her feet with obvious difficulty and turned to them was definitely as old as the house and perhaps as wrinkled as it was. Yes, I was, she replied. You see, our friend told me that you would come. And who is that friend? Dan asked, already thinking that Damianos had taken the shape of the woman facing them now. Don't worry, she said, tittering and coming away from behind the chair that had been hiding her body. I am not Damianos. Malou put her hand to her mouth not to scream when she saw the dream catcher hanging around her neck. Wow, Dan exclaimed. You've been to Pahokee? You've got a dream catcher, Malou added, still surprised. But why aren't you back in Florida then? You see, my dear, I wasn't as quick as you will be, I'm sure, and things happen when you're visiting your past, as you well know by now, so I missed the hour and the day, and I had to relive my past and my present to end up in a future that I didn't want. Her eyes travelled around the room. I had a new home, a fantastic life, and children who adored me, and I had to leave it all behind for some foolish dream that I would be able to repair some of my past mistakes. And now look at me. I am alone, and I only wait for visitors that Damianos sends me from time to time. So you know that cat, do you? Dan asked. Solange nodded and went to sit on the sofa. Oh, yes, but please have a seat. She pointed to the other two chairs facing the sofa. And tell me what brought you to the house. It's a long story, ma'am, Malou began. Please call me Solange. Damianos must have told you my name, hasn't he? Yes, he did, Solange, Dan said. But did he tell you who we are? We don't communicate much anymore, you see, but he's told me that you had an accident. She looked at Dan. And that you're trying to get back to some drugstore or other before midnight, is that right? But you said you don't communicate much anymore. How could he tell you about us then? Malou asked, visibly confused. Ah, yes, I've blocked his invasion of my environment, but not of my thoughts. He can't come in. And why is that? Dan was impatient. Because if you look around the house and practically on every window pane, you'll see why. Dan got up and went to lift the drapes covering the front window. He gasped and then smiled. The window was covered of a laced dream catcher similar to the little one Malou had put on his chest while he was still in a coma. Look at this, Malou, he called to her. This is fantastic. There is a dream catcher on every window. Did you get them from the old Indian too? Malou asked, returning her gaze from the window Solange. Oh no, my dear, but he taught me how to tap the lace in a dream, and every time I finished one of them, Damianos, who was still my favourite cat in those days, kept climbing the drapes trying to rip it off. Solange smiled at the recollection, but every time he tried he would scold his paws. Did he really? Dan remarked, and I bet he had to leave before the last dreamcatcher was up, didn't he? If Damianos can burn his paws when he touches a dreamcatcher, I think he will feel the fire that will burn him to hell, where he belongs, Dan sniggered to himself. Oh yes, and by then I realised that he was the one who had prevented me to return to Pahokee in time. Dan regained his seat, and after a minute or so of silence he asked, How did he prevent you from returning to Pahokee? Could you tell us how it happened? Well, such as yours is, mine is also a long story and a painful one, but I can tell you that every time I see nearing the place where I needed to go back, he managed to stop me. Once I fell and broke my leg. Another time I imaged I was in a desert looking for an oasis. Dan and Malou exchanged a knowing smile. And the last thing that happened really damaged my chances of ever going back. Can we ask you what happened? Malou insisted as gently as she could, knowing how painful such memories could be. Well, you see, I love books, and one night the book I was reading knocked off the oil lamp from my night table and the carpet caught on fire. Gladly I woke up when I still had the time to get out and call for help, but my arm was badly burned and I fainted in the front garden. When I came to, I was lying in the hospital, incapable of moving. Do you know if you were drugged? Dan asked, already recognising the similarities between his and Solangi's story. I don't know if I was, but the long and short of it is that the time for my going back to Pahokee had long passed, and I knew I was destined to remain here forever.